So what I want, when I click on this add a student button, I should see a new window. Okay, just like you can see here in this original project, when I'm clicking on this add a student, I'm able to see this new window, right? Where we will be entering all these details of a student. Okay, and once we'll click on the submit button, these details will be saved in our database and will be displayed in this tree view, okay, under these column names. So we will see this functionality. But before that, let's see how we can create this. Okay, so it's very easy. So what we have to do, we have to give a command to this add student. Okay, so here I'll pass a command and the function name would be add student. Okay, so whenever you will click on this button, this particular function will be called, and whatever code that will be inside this, that code will be executed. So in this functionality part, I'll define this function. So firstly, we need to create a new window, which is nothing but a top level window, right? And it will be created with the help of top level class. Here we need to provide some object name, which will be nothing but the window name. So the window would be add window, like this. Okay. Next thing is we need to add, first of all, the ID as you saw in the original one. So what I'll do, I'll create ID label here, and since it's a label, it will be created with the help of a label class. Now this label has to be on this add window, so I'll pass add window here. Then the text on the label would be ID. Okay, after that I'll provide font for this text. So the styling that I'm gonna use is Times New Roman. Size for the text can be 20, and I'll make the text as bold. Okay, and then I'll simply grid it. So I'll write ID label dot grid. You must be wondering why I am not providing any geometry to this top level window. So when I'll be grading it, this window size will automatically increase. Okay, but if you want to provide some width and height initially, you can do that. So if I'll run it, let me just connect to the database. As you remember, last time we have directly inserted host name, username and password in the code. That's why I don't have to enter it here. Okay, so once I click on it, you see we are getting ID. Okay, when once you'll add other labels, the window size will automatically increase. So after adding this ID, now we need to add its corresponding entry field. So we'll mention the name as ID entry and we'll be using entry class. Again, this entry class has to be inside this add window only. Okay, then we can provide font for the text that you will type inside this entry field. Okay, so I'll go with Roman and the size for the text will be 15, and I'll make the text as bold. And then I can simply grade it. So ID entry dot grade. Now where I'll grade it, I have not mentioned any row and column value to this grade method. So when you are not mentioning any row and column value, then by default it takes row 0 and column 0 only. Okay, so for this one, since this entry field has to be just next to this ID label, so I'll mention row as 0 only, but the column will change to 1. Okay, so if you see, after ID we are getting the corresponding entry field. okay, where we will mention the ID number. Let me just provide some padding between these two. Okay, so I'll provide pad x to this ID label of 20 pixels. Yeah, so you can see there is some horizontal spacing now. Okay, in the same way, if you want, you can provide some vertical spacing also. So we can provide some pad y of 15 pixels. Let me increase pad x to 30. So I'm using the same values which I have used in my original project, but you can decrease or increase these values according to your choice. Okay, and then to this entry class I'm going to provide some width. So width would be 24. Okay, and to this grid method I'll be adding some pad y. Okay, vertical spacing. So vertical spacing has to be this much only, like this ID label. Okay, and also I'll add some pad x of 10 pixels. Okay, so now if I'll run it, you can see this is how it looks now. Okay, so pad x, pad y, width, these values are changeable. You can change it to your choice. Okay, I hope this is clear. And now after ID, what was next? I need to enter the details here. So next we have name and then phone. Okay, so let's add these two first. So what I'm going to do, I'm simply going to copy these 4 lines because all the labels and their entry fields will be created in the similar way, and I'll paste here. So I just need to change the variable names. So ID label and ID entry will be changed to name label and name entry. Okay, then the text here will change to name, right? Column values will change here. Sorry, row values will change here. So row will become 1. Okay, because at row 0 we have this ID label and ID entry. So at row 1 we will have name label and name entry. Okay, so that's it. Now let's check. Yeah, so this is perfect. Okay, uh, okay, now let's move to the third one, which was phone. So again I'll paste the same thing and I'll do the changes here. Okay, the text here will change to phone, and after that we had email. Here the text will change to email. Okay, and yeah, don't forget to change the row values. Okay, so row here will become 2, then here the row will become 3. Let's run. So yeah, we got ID, name, phone, email. Okay, let's see what was next. So ID, name, phone, email. After that we had address, gender, and DOB, which is date of birth. Okay, so let's add address. So again I'll paste, and here I'll change the object variable name. This one would be address label and address entry. The text here will change to address. Row values will change to 4. Okay, after address then we had gender, So this is gender, row values will change to 5, and last we had DOB, which is date of birth. Okay, so DOB label and DOB entry field, then the text will change to DOB, and row value will be changed to 6. Yeah, so I think this is fine. But one thing that I need to fix here is these labels. Okay, I want them to stick on the left hand side. Okay, to be sticked on the left hand side. For that, what we need to do to these labels, we'll have to provide one keyword argument. Okay, so to this grid method, I'll provide sticky. Okay, and the value will be the direction, east, west. Okay, so west means on the left hand side. So now you will see this ID will be sticked to the west like this. Okay, same thing I'll be doing with all the labels so that they are aligned properly. Okay, so I'll just place multiple cursors with the help of Alt and mouse left button. Yeah, now you see the alignment is proper. Okay, so this is done. At last we need to add a button, okay, which will be add student button. So at the end I'll create add student button, and we'll be using a button class. This button has to be inside add window only. Okay, the text on this button will be add student. Okay, and since I'm going to provide styling to this button, so I'll write ttk dot. Okay, and then I'll simply grade it. So I'll write add student button dot grade method. Okay, and to this grade method I'll be passing a row value which is 7 because I want it just next to this DOB entry, right? So row will be 7 here, and I'll not pass any column here, so but I'll pass column span of 2. So this button will take 2 column spaces, so it will appear at the center position. Okay, between this label and this entry field at row 7. I hope this is clear to you. Yeah, as you can see here, we are getting button like this. Okay, you can also add some vertical spacing to this button so that you can see some spacing. Okay, and we are done with this one. So I'll pass pad y of 10 pixels. That's it, or maybe 15. Okay, so this is done. Now what we have to do, once we fill the information, okay, inside the entry fields, and once we click on this button add a student, the data should be inserted in our database that we created in the previous video. So database name was student management system. So basically the data will be inserted in the table, and the table name was student. Okay, so we will be entering ID, okay, then name, mobile, email, address, gender, date of birth, date and time. Okay, so for date and time we did not create any entry fields. Okay, but we'll use the variables, and we'll store date and time inside those variables, and we'll directly insert them inside the database. So we'll see all this. Okay, So I hope till here you guys don't have any confusion. When we are clicking on connect to database, so we are simply using this student management system database. So now we can insert data inside this student management system database. Okay, so we'll see how we can insert data by clicking on this add student. So I'll pass command here. So whenever you'll click add student, this particular command will be called. So the command name that I'm going to provide here is add data. Okay, now let's define this. So we can define it inside this function def add data. So what is the first thing that we need to do? Let me just run the original one again. So if you see this, if I'm not entering any details and directly try to click on the submit button, you see it says all fields are required. So none of the entry fields can be empty. Okay, so firstly we will apply this condition. So here I'll write that if id entry dot get, if this is equals to null, or name entry dot get is equals to null, or phone entry dot get equals to null, or email entry dot get equals to null, or address entry dot get equals to null. Okay, after that, or we have gender. So gender entry dot get equals to null, or dob entry, okay, dot get equals to null. So if all of these or any one out of these entry fields will be null, then this condition will become true. Okay, suppose you have filled all the entry fields but you have left this address entry field blank. Okay, in that case also this condition will become true. Okay, and if you have not filled any of the entry fields, still this condition will become true. So if this condition is becoming true, in that case what I'll do, I'll simply show a message box, and I'll show an error message box where the title will be error and the message will be all fields are required. Okay, so if without entering any details, if I directly click on this add student, it says all fields are required. But again, this message box is appearing on our main window, and I want to see it on our top level window, add student window. Okay, so for that what we can do, we can pass parent here. So parent will be add window. And one more thing that I would like to do here, so this window can be maximized. Okay, and this does not look good. So what I'll do, I'll make this window non-resizable. For that, as you know, we have a method inside this top level class which is resizable, and we need to pass false value for the width and false value for the height. Okay, now you won't be able to maximize the window. Its size is fixed now. Okay, so this is disabled. Let me add one more thing here. So when this particular window is opened, I should not be able to click on some other button. For example, if I'm clicking on this exit button, as you can see, that particular window is getting minimized. Okay, So this is not a good thing. Okay, so what I'll do, uh, there is one method which is grab set. So that will not allow me to click somewhere else, okay, until and unless I close this particular top level window. Now you'll see that. So once I open this window, okay, if I try to click some other button, now I'm not able to click. So once I'll close this window, then only I will be able to click on some other button. Okay, and even I cannot close this window. Firstly I'll have to close this window, and then only I'll be able to close some other window. So this is what I wanted. So I hope it's clear. Now once I fill all the details, ID, name, phone, email, address, gender, date of birth, and when I click on this add student, all the details should be inserted in our database. Okay, so let's see this thing first. So I'll simply go to the else part. I'm gonna write a query to insert data inside database. So I'll take a variable query. We need to write insert into, then the table name. So table name is student. Let me just verify it once. So the database name is student management system and the table name is student. Okay, and these are all the columns that are there. So the query is insert into student values. So values will be strings that we will get from the entry fields. So %s for ID, okay, that will get from ID entry field. Then %s for name, for phone, for email, for address, for gender, for date of birth. And then we need to add two more things in our database, right? Next is %s for date, okay, then %s for time. So these are the values that we want to insert inside this student table. So this is the query. Now we need to execute this query. So in order to execute, we'll be requiring my cursor variable, and this variable we defined inside this connect database. So we'll be requiring this my cursor variable. So what we can do, we can make this variable global here, so that this variable can be used inside some other function. So my cursor, okay, now this variable can be used here inside this add data function. Okay, so write my cursor dot execute and we'll pass this query here. So we pass the query, but we also need to insert these values that we added here in the form of %s. Okay, so that values will get from the entry field. So firstly we'll get ID from ID entry field. So we'll use get method to get the ID. Okay, then name. So name entry dot get will give us name. Then we need phone number. So phone entry will give us phone number. Okay, then we require email. After that we require address, then gender. I forgot to add get method here. Let me move it to a new line. After address we require gender. Okay, after gender we'll be adding date of birth. Date of birth dot get method. Okay, and make sure these data should be inserted in the similar way as you have defined the columns here. okay, in the same order. Firstly, we will be inserting ID, so ID will be inserted in this ID column, then name will be inserted, after that mobile phone, okay, then email, after that address, gender, date of birth, then date and time. So for date and time we did not create any entry field, so we'll get the date and time in some variable and we'll simply insert them. Okay, so let me just for now insert this date variable here and time variable here. Okay, so instead of only date, let me pass current date and current time. So we'll get the current date and current time and we'll store inside these two variables. Okay, so how can we get the current date and current time? For that we'll be importing time module, which is already imported here. Okay, because we have already used it when we were adding date time on our label at the top left corner. Okay, so can we use those values? Yeah, if you remember, this was the code for getting date and time, so I can simply copy these two lines from here. Okay, and I'll paste here in the else part at the top. So I'll change this variable to current date, okay, and then current time. So once you execute this, after that you also need to commit. Okay, so whenever you do any changes in the data, like if you are adding some data into the database, or you are updating some data, or you are deleting some data, we always have to commit. Okay, so for committing we will be requiring one variable that we have used here. So this con variable is used to commit the changes. Okay, so in order to use this variable inside some other function, we'll be making it global. So we'll make this con variable as global here. Now we can use this con variable to commit the changes. So con dot commit, like this. Okay, so once changes are committed, means the data is inserted in our database. After that I'll show a message box. So I'll write message box dot ask yes no. Okay, and I'll ask yes or no. So basically the question would be that do you want to clean the form, just like you saw in our original project. Okay, so whenever I fill the data, once I click add student, it shows me a message box, okay, where it asks for do you want to clean the form. If yes, then click on yes, otherwise click on no. Okay, so we'll add that same functionality here. So I'll write here data added successfully, do you want to clean the form. Okay, so if you answer yes, then true value will be stored inside this result variable, and if you'll answer no, then false value will be stored inside this result variable. Okay, so let me just print this result variable so that you can see on the console what you are getting inside this variable. Okay, so let me just run this code and let me just add some data. So I'll take ID1, name, my name, then some phone number, email, address, gender, and date of birth. Okay, once I clicked on add student, so I made one mistake. The mistake is that in the title I added the message. Okay, so this is the mistake that I did. So if you will say yes, then something will be printed on the console. Let me just close this and show you what is printed on the console. True. Like if you have clicked on no, then in that case you would have got false here. Okay, so with the help of this variable, I'll check that if result is true. If it is true, then I need to clean the form, right? So what I'll do, I'll write id entry dot delete everything from start till end, right? So I'll simply copy the same line with the help of Control D. Okay, so id, after id entry we'll add name entry, then phone entry, after that email entry, and then address entry, gender entry, and DOB entry. And yeah, let me just fix it. So this you were seeing in the title, okay, but this is a message, not the title. So let me first add the title. So firstly we'll have to pass the title and then the message. Okay, so title here can be confirm. So yeah, this is fine. Now since the data is inserted in our student table, so we can check. So for that let's open our MySQL command line client, and here let me just check the databases. Okay, now let me just use our student management system database. Okay, now let's just check the tables inside it. Now let's check the data of this table. Okay, so you can see one data is inserted, id1, name Faizan, then number, email, address, okay, gender, date of birth, date and time. So I hope you have understood how you can insert the data into the database. Okay, so this is the way. So let me explain you once again what will happen inside this function when you will click add student button. Firstly, it will check for all the fields. If any one of the fields will be empty, then you will simply see this message box that all fields are required. Okay, after that, if you have filled all the fields completely, so you'll simply move to the else part, and here firstly you'll get the current date and current time inside these two variables. After that, inside this query variable I have written one query. So what will happen, these %s will be replaced with the values that will get from these entry fields. Okay, and those values will simply be inserted inside this student table. Okay, under the columns that we have defined when we were creating our table. Okay, id, name, mobile, email, and so on. Okay, so I hope it's clear. Then once the changes are inserted in your database, then you are simply seeing this message box that data added successfully, and there is a question that do you want to clean the form. Since it's asked yes no message box, okay, so you will get two options, yes or no. If you'll click yes, then this condition will become true. Okay, and this code will be executed where you are simply cleaning the form. And if you'll click no, then nothing will happen. Okay, because we are not adding any else part. But if you want, you can add else part, and in the else part you can simply pass that you don't want to do anything in the else part when you'll click no. Okay, you don't want to clean the form in that case. So this is the thing that we wanted to do. So let me just show you once more. Let me just add one more data with id2, name Tuba, some random phone number, and make sure you have to enter just 10 digits. So 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10. Okay, because we have mentioned 10 characters, okay, for our database, that we can only insert 10 characters inside this phone. And then we have email, after that address, can be anything, then female, and 8 October. Add student. So it says data added successfully. Do you want to clean the form? Again, the same issue we are facing here, that this form is appearing on top of our main window and not on top of our top level class, top level window basically. Okay, so let me just click on yes to show you that the data is cleared from these entry fields. Okay, let me just add parent to this message box. So I'll write parent equals to add window, like this. Okay, so now this message box will appear on top of your add window. So I hope till here you guys have understood everything. Now what next we need to do? Once you fill up this form, okay, once you fill up the form of this add student, and once you see that message box, and whether you want to clean it or not, you can either press yes or no. Okay, after that, what should happen? We should see that particular data that we inserted in our database under these columns also, on this, inside this tree view. Okay, under this ID we should get ID, then under name we should get name, then mobile number, and so on. Okay, so how can we do it? So what we are going to do, we are going to fetch the data from the database. So we'll write here a query. So write select star from student, okay, which is the table name. So we will execute this query. So we'll use my cursor dot execute, and here we'll pass this query variable. Okay, so what this will do, this will give us the complete data which is there inside this student table, all the rows. So what we are going to do, we are going to fetch that data. So I'll store that fetch data in some variable, fetched data. So how can we fetch it? We'll be using this my cursor. Okay, my cursor. So this variable is also used to fetch data from the database. Okay, so we'll use my cursor dot fetch all method, and you can print this fetch data so that you can understand what is what we are getting inside this variable. Okay, so if I run it, let me quickly add some data here. So after adding the data, once I click add a student, you see we are getting this message box. Now if I click yes, this form will be cleaned and our data is successfully added in the database. But let's see what we are getting inside this fetch data that we are printing. So you can see we are getting all the data that we inserted in our database. So firstly, if you remember, I inserted this data, okay, which is in this tuple. After that, we inserted this second data, and just now inserted this third data. Okay, so we are getting all the data that is there in our database. So now to insert this data in our database, we will have to convert it into a list. Right now this data is in the form of a tuple. Okay, so we will have to convert this to a list. So it's very easy. What we'll do, instead of printing, we'll use a for loop here. So for data in fetched data. Okay, so when this loop will run for the first time, that then inside this data variable we'll be getting this highlighted tuple. Okay, what I'll do, I'll simply convert it to a list. So I'll use this list function and I'll pass this data tuple to it, and we'll get the data list. Okay, I hope this is clear. And once you'll get the data in the form of a list, now you can insert this data inside our tree view. So to insert data in our tree view, we'll be using the object name of our tree view and its method. Okay, tree view method. So if you remember, the tree view object variable name was student table. So we'll be using insert method of this tree view class to insert data inside this. Okay, so we'll go back, and here once we are getting a data list, after that I'll use this student table. Okay, this is nothing but our tree view object variable dot insert method to insert data in our tree view. So to this insert method, firstly we'll be mentioning empty string, okay, which represents root node. After that we'll pass the index, as you can see here in the suggestions. Okay, so index is where you want to add the data. So I want every data to be inserted at the end. Okay, so firstly we'll see the first data that we inserted, then we'll see the second data, and then we'll see the third data. So every time the data will be inserted at the end here. Okay, so here we'll pass end like this, and then what you want to insert, that you have to pass. So we'll be inserting values, so we'll pass the values which are inside this list, data list. Okay, so we'll pass this data list here. So now if I run it, let me again quickly fill this form. So after clicking add student and after deleting this data from the form, you can see the data is inserted in our tree view here. So you can see we are getting ID, name, mobile, email, address, gender, date of birth, added date, and then added time. Okay, but here is one issue. If I'll add one more data here, so once I add this data, you can see what is happening. The previous data is still there. Okay, Faizan, Tuba, Rahul, Sita. So this previous data is not getting deleted and this new data is getting inserted. So what I want, once I add any student data, okay, then the previous data should be deleted and the new data should be inserted in our tree view. For that, what we can do, just before inserting the data, we can delete everything from the tree view, and then the new data, updated data, will be inserted. Okay, so every time whenever you will add some data, firstly the previous old data will be deleted and then new data will be inserted. So here I'll write student table dot delete method, and we will be deleting all the children of this student table. So we'll write student table dot get children. Okay, like this. So now you will see that only new data is getting inserted and previous data will be deleted. So let me enter the details. If you'll add some other data, so now if I add this Robert data, you will see the changes here. Okay, you can see the previous data is now not displayed here. Okay, because it is firstly getting deleted and then the updated data is getting added here. Okay, so I hope this is clear to you. And one more thing that I want to tell you here is that we cannot use the same ID. Okay, because ID is a primary key, so it has to be unique. Okay, if you'll try to add some data with id 3, then you will be getting an error. Let me just show you. So you can see we are getting some error. Let me show you on my console. So it says duplicate entry 3, right, for key student primary. Okay, because id is a primary key, so we cannot have the duplicate entry there. Okay, so what we can do, we can display some message box when the user is typing the duplicate id. Okay, instead of getting this error on the console. So what I'll do, uh, I'll be adding the try and except block here. So I'll add try block here. Let me just select the code and provide indentation. Okay, till here, and then I'll add the except block. So if you are writing the correct id, okay, like you are not duplicating it, then this particular code will be executed till here. Okay, and if you are adding some duplicate id, in that case we'll move to the except block code. Okay, and here we'll simply display a message box and we'll show some error. So the error message box would have the message that id cannot be repeated or something like this, and we'll pass the parent as uh, add window, right? So I hope this is clear. And after this message box we can simply return from here, because I don't want the rest of the code to be executed. Okay, we don't want to display the student data on our tree view. Okay, if the id is repeated, so we'll simply return from that. Okay, so I hope till here you have understood everything. So this is the functionality of our add student button. Okay, I hope it's clear to you. Now after this we will be adding functionality of our search student. So we'll define a function here, search student. Okay, and let me just call this function from our search button. So this is our search button, and I'll pass command equals to search student without parenthesis. Okay, now when I click on search student, what should happen. Let me just show you in my original project. So once I click on the search student, again I'm getting a top level window, okay, where we have the same data that is there in our add student window, okay. And then at last we have the search button. So we will be quickly creating this. So I hope now you have understood how to create a new window on top of another window, okay. So we'll be creating in a similar way. So what I'm going to do, I'm simply going to copy the code from here, okay, till the end, and we just need to change this add student button to search button, okay. So inside the search student function, I'll paste the code. All right, and now I can change this add window object variable to search window. So what is the way in PyCharm? You can press Ctrl R, okay, and here you can mention that which word you want to replace. So I want to replace this add window, and then here you can enter the word with which you want to replace this add window. I'll replace it with search window, like this. So you can select this and you can one by one replace all this, okay. And if you'll do replace all, then everywhere this add window will be changed to search window, but I don't want that thing to happen. So I'll replace one by one, like this, okay. After doing this, next thing that I would like to do here is change this button. So instead of add student, this will be search student button, okay. And then the command name will also change. Instead of add data, the command name will change to search data, and we need to define this function, okay. So inside this search data, we'll write the functionality of how we can search the data from our database. So let me show you how search functionality works in this original project. So if I'll click on this search student, we are seeing this GUI here, okay. So we can search any student data based on ID or name or phone or email or address or gender or even date of birth, okay. So we just need to enter it here. Like if we want to search on the basis of ID, suppose if I search ID 3, so I'll enter 3 here and we'll click on search. So once I'll click on search, you can see the result here. Since ID is unique, so we will be getting just one result here, right, okay. And in the same way, if you want to search based on name, you can do that. Suppose if I search my name, let me see if I have some record. So you can see ID 5 is my record, so I'm getting that result here. Similarly, if you'll search based on phone number, you can do that. Similarly, based on email also, like for example, if I search this email data, so you can see I'm getting the result here, okay. Similarly, you can search based on address. So if I want to see how many people live in Delhi, so I'll simply click on search and you can see these are the students who live in Delhi, okay. In the same way, we can search based on gender. So if I search for females only, so you can see there are 4 females in total, okay. So this is the functionality that we have to do, how this is happening. So let's see. First of all, let me just show you in the database how we search any particular data. Okay, so if I enter the password here, and let me just use student management system database. Okay, now what we have to write, we have to write select star from student table. Okay, select star from student table where id equals to 3. Okay, so when we have to search based on some column name, so we enter the column name and its value. Okay, so if you want to search based on id, then after id you need to mention the id value, and once you hit enter, you will get that result where you have id 3. So this is the query that we need to use. So it simply means that we are selecting all the rows from student table where id is 3. And similarly, if you want to display all the rows where gender equals to male, for that you will have to write select star from student where gender equals to male. Okay, right? So in the same way we will be doing in our code. So inside this function we will mention query equals to select star from student where id equals to %s. Okay, and we'll get id from our id entry field. So we'll simply execute this query. So we'll write my cursor dot execute, and here we'll pass query, and then we also need to pass id entry, id entry dot get method. Okay, so whatever id that you'll get from here, this %s will be replaced with that id. Okay, once you will get that particular row, after that we will store the fetch data, I mean that particular row, in some variable. So I'll use fetch data variable here, and we will be using my cursor dot fetch all method. Okay, so that particular row will now be stored inside this fetch data variable, and this we need to insert in our tree view, right? And before inserting, again we will have to delete the previous data. Okay, then only we will be updating the new data, otherwise you will see the previous data and the new data. So I don't want to see the previous data. For that I'll be using table, student table dot delete method, and will delete student table all children. Okay, so get children. After that we'll be simply inserting this fetch data in our tree view. So we will be accessing one by one all the data using for loop. So we'll use for data in fetch data. Okay, and this will have one tuple. Okay, earlier I told you that we need to convert it into a list in order to insert in our tree view, but without converting it to a list, still we can insert the data directly. So here if you see, we have converted into a list. So if I don't convert it into a list, and directly if I use this data variable here, still it will work in the same way. Okay, so I'll not convert to a list. Now coming back here, we'll do the same thing. Okay, so we'll be using student table dot insert method, and to the root node we'll be inserting at the end the values which are inside this data variable, like this. Okay, so now if I run it, if I enter id here, you can see we are getting the result, right? But if I try to enter name, will this work? No. The reason is that we did not add any query for name or phone or email or address or gender or date of birth. So we need to add that. And also we need to change this text to search. Okay. And I'll also change the title here. So instead of incident management system, we should see search here, search student maybe. Okay. So let me just firstly provide title here. So I'll add search window dot title and we'll enter title as search student. Okay. And then let's change the text of our button. So this is our search button, and here instead of add student, we'll write search. Okay. Now coming back to this function, inside this query only, we'll add or id name equals to %s. Okay. And then we will be replacing this %s with the value that we'll get from our name entry. So here we need to pass that name entry. Okay. So the id that we'll be getting from our id entry, this %s will be replaced with that, and then this %s will be replaced with this name entry data. Okay. So I hope you are able to understand this query. So if you will be entering the ID, then you will be getting all the rows for that ID. And if you will be entering the name, then you will be getting all the rows for that name. Okay. And if you'll enter both ID and name, suppose if you'll enter ID 3 and name Faizan, then you will be getting both the rows. Okay. In which ID will be 3 and name will be Faizan. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So if I'll enter only ID as 3, once I search, you can see we are getting this particular row where ID is 3. Okay. Now, if I don't enter ID, if I only enter name, and if I search it, you can see I'm getting the row where name is Faizan. Okay. Now, if you enter ID 3 and name Faizan and you try to search, you'll get both the results. Okay. So I hope you are able to understand. In the same way, we'll do it for phone, email, address, gender, and date of birth. So here we'll mention or email equals to %s, or mobile equals to %s, or address equals to %s, or gender equals to %s, and last or dob equals to %s. Alright, now you need to pass the values which will replace this %s. Okay, so after name, then we'll pass email entry data. Okay, after that we'll pass phone entry data, and then we'll pass address entry, then gender, and last dob entry dot get method. So I hope this is clear to you. So let's search based on address. So if I want to see all the records where address is Delhi, so you can see there is only one record. Okay, and we can also search for all the records who are male. So you see we are getting the result. So this is working perfectly fine. Now let's see the functionality of this delete student button. Okay, so how this will work, we'll have to select any row whichever you want to delete from here, and then we'll simply click on this delete student button, and that particular row will be deleted from this tree view as well as from the database. Okay, so let me show you this in my original project how it works. So if you see this original project, let me first click on this show student. So we are getting all the records here, and then whichever data you want to delete, just simply select that and click on this delete student, and it says id 4 deleted successfully. Once you'll click OK, you can see that record is deleted from here. Okay, so let's see how we can do this. So I'm gonna define a function here, def delete student. Let me firstly call this function from our delete button. So here I'll pass command equals to delete student. So firstly we will select the data. Okay, and once you'll select that data, you will be getting some ID. Okay, basically the index of that data. We can get the content with the help of that index, and from the content we will fetch the ID, and with the help of the ID we will delete the record. Okay, because as you know ID is unique, it's a primary key, so we can delete the records based on ID, as there won't be any duplicate records. Okay, so firstly we will get the indexing of the row which you are selecting on tree view, right? So we'll use student table object dot focus method. Okay, and whichever row you will select, that row index will go inside this indexing variable, and we can print this. Okay, and with the help of this indexing we can get the content, I mean the complete row. Okay, so what we have to write is student table dot item, and to this item we will be passing the indexing. So we can pass indexing here, and this will give us the complete content corresponding to that particular index. Okay, and we can print this content too, so that you can see what is there inside it. Now let's run and see. So once I connect to the database, now if I click on this delete student, but firstly we'll have to display the data here, right? But we have not done show student functionality. So what we can do, we can add some student, or instead of adding we can search for some student. Like let's search based on gender. So see we are getting the records here, right? Now if I want to delete this Rahul from here, so I'll select Rahul and will click on this delete student. Okay, let's see what is getting printed. So you can see firstly this is the indexing that I was talking about. Okay, and based on this indexing we are getting the content. Okay, and this content is nothing but a dictionary. The key is this values, and the value is this list. Okay, and we need to get this 3 from here. So with the help of this 3 we can delete this record. Okay, so what I'll do here, I'll write content, which is nothing but a dictionary, and will pass values, which is nothing but the key, and this will give us values, and values will be nothing but this complete list, and from this list I have to access this ID only, which is at index 0. So here I can simply pass indexing of this 3. Okay, so this will give us content ID. Okay, now once you have the content ID, now you can delete the record. So how to delete a record from database? For that we'll have to write one query here, and the query is delete all rows from student table where id equals to %s. Okay, so this is the query, and now we need to execute this query. So we'll use my cursor dot execute, and here we'll pass query, and then we'll be passing the id. Okay, and the id is inside this content id variable, so we'll simply pass this variable here like this. And as I told you, if you are deleting some data or you are adding some data, in that case we also need to commit the changes. So we'll use con dot commit method. Okay, so once the record is deleted, after that we can display a message box that this particular id is deleted. So we'll write message box dot show info, and firstly the title, the title can be deleted, and then the message, this, and then the id name. Okay, id number, sorry, so id number is inside this variable. So in order to use variable with a string, you'll have to use f string. Okay, and in parentheses you can pass this content id. So this content id is deleted successfully. And before running this code, let me show you the same thing in our database. If you go to this command line client, and firstly let's check all the rows that are there in our database. We'll write select star from student. Okay, so these are all the rows. Now if you want to delete some particular row, so with the help of id we can delete that. So if you want to delete row number 3, okay, where id is 3, so we'll write delete star from student where id equals to 3. Sorry, we are getting error. In case of delete we don't have to use this asterisk, so the query is just delete from student where id is 3. So the query is executed, and now let's check again all the rows of student table. So now you will not see the row with id 3, okay, because it's deleted. So I hope this is clear to you, and let me just make the change here also. We don't have to use asterisk, so the query is delete from a student where id is %s. Okay, now let's run. So if I'll search mail, so we have 3 records here. Okay, if I want to delete this 6th id record, so I'll select it and we'll click on this delete student, and it says this 6 is deleted successfully. Okay, the message doesn't look good, so we'll write id 6 is deleted successfully. Okay, so once we'll click OK, nothing will happen because we have not added any code after this. Okay, let me just change this message to id is deleted successfully. Okay, so we can verify it. Let's check all the rows of our database. So select star from student, and from here you can see that Rohit record is deleted. Okay. So just after deleting the record, what I want to display in our tree view, I want to display the updated record. So this record does not contain Rohit record, right? So I want to display this updated record in our tree view. So for that, we'll be writing a query, select star from student, and then we'll execute this query. So my cursor dot execute, and we'll pass query here, and then we'll fetch all the rows in some variable. So we'll write my cursor dot fetch all, and then we'll use a for loop for data in fetch data, and this data will contain tuple one by one. Okay, and that will simply insert in our tree view. So we'll write student table dot insert method, like this. Okay, so now you will see the updated rows in your tree view. So I hope this is clear. Let me just run it. This time let me search all the females. So we have 3 records here. If I want to delete ID 5, so I'll select and we'll click this delete. ID 5 is deleted successfully. Once I'll click OK. So what is happening? We are getting the updated data, but again the previous data is not getting deleted. So as you know, we'll have to delete the previous data and then we'll have to insert the new data. Okay, so we'll write student table dot delete, and we'll delete all the previous data. So we'll delete all the children's of this student table. Okay, so I hope you understood. You can run it and you'll see the changes. So this functionality is also done. After this, we can also complete the functionality of this show student. This is very easy. So let's quickly finish this. So I'm gonna define a function here, def show student, and I'll call this function from show student button. So I'll pass command equals to show student. Okay, so in case of show student, once I'll click that button, I want to see all the records in our tree view. Okay, so it's very simple, just like we have done here. Okay, we have written this query to get all the rows from a student table. We'll use the same query there, and then we'll fetch the data, and after that we'll delete firstly all the data from our tree view, and then we'll update our tree view. Okay, all right, so we'll simply copy it from here and we'll paste it. Okay, let's see. So if I click show student, you can see we are getting all the records here. Let me also show the same thing in our database. So if I write select star from student, this way you will get all the records, all the rows. So you can see we have just 4 records now. Okay, and that same data you are getting here. So I hope you understood everything till here. In our next final video, we will work on the functionality of this update student, export data, and this exit button. So that's it for this video. I hope you liked it. Thank you for watching.